My last video had been about tips for painting backgrounds, so I thought I'd actually make one since it had been a little while. And I also thought I'd try a draw of me style of video to see what that's like to do. My hope is that you'll pick up some techniques from this that you'd like to use in your own work. So join me as I show how I go about creating this piece. I've been feeling inspired from a recent walk I went on where there were lots of fallen trees over a stream. So I wanted to create a piece inspired by that. I saw this really cool free brush set on Gumroad by Devon L. Kurtz that had lots of leafy grassy brushes, so I wanted to try it out too. Normally I just stick to the same 3 or 4 brushes for everything, so it was nice to speed my process up with these. I'll have a link in the description for if you want to try it out too. Altogether, this piece ended up taking me about 6 hours in real time. When I started out, I really wasn't sure if I wanted to go for a landscape or portrait piece. In the end, I went for a landscape piece so that I could fit more ground plants in. I made thumbnails of both to help me with deciding. I always get my best inspiration for pieces from getting out into nature and making something based on what I saw. Maybe it's a strange thing, but I really liked the contrast between the vertical trees and the horizontal fallen ones over the water, so I wanted to capture that as I thought it would make an interesting composition. For my super messy sketch, I just wanted to plan out a rough layout so I could use it as a guide to paint over the top of. I used one of the default Procreate brushes, which was gouache, but with pressure taper turned up to 50%. I knew I was going to be painting over the majority of it, so I just scribbled in some lines to hint at the details of plants. I set this layer to multiply for the next stage. I like painting natural foresty scenes with lots of plants because they're calming to look at and nice to get lost in the details of. I like making pieces that are like a little window into a relaxing place to escape to. Underneath the sketch layer, I threw down some loose greens so that I'd have something ready to work with for when I moved on to colour picking and rendering everything. I used a few different shades rather than one so that it would look more interesting and natural. I also knew I wanted to add a multiply and overlay layer at the end to add extra shadows and light for depth, so I tested what they might look like. Although in the end, the final result ended up being quite different. It's still good to have a rough plan though, so you're not starting out with nothing to go on. I think having everything planned out in the beginning makes art a lot easier and more enjoyable to do, just so that you can get into the zone more easily. And now it's time for the longest part of the process. I always start from the background and work my way forwards. The brush set saved me so much time here because I was able to quickly put down the shapes of leaves rather than drawing most of them individually. My 3 favourites ended up being these tree builders and the ground brush, which I weirdly used for the water instead of ground. For some of this part, I spend a little time painting over the sketch lines to cover them. But I always keep the original sketch saved as an extra layer so I can refer back to it if I need to. I like using layers as backups so I have the option to jump back to a previous stage if I really dislike the direction my piece is going in. Apart from that though, I don't really break everything up into its own layers as I find it too time consuming. If there's something I don't like or something I want to move at a later stage, I'll just select it and paint over any bits that need touched up. I used some of the textured brushes in this set to add in some tree trunks and their details. Rather than drawing all the branches by hand, I used a brush to start them off, then just tidied them up. I also used brushes to hint at different types of plants in the foreground bushes. The fern brushes were good for this, and I also liked all of the plant stock ones. On the left side of the piece, I did the same process. It's good to start zoomed out with large shapes before zooming in to do little details. I also forgot to mention a really cool trick in my last tips video that lets you check your values quickly just to make sure your darks and lights look strong enough. If you add some black to a layer above everything else and set it to colour, flicking it on and off lets you see it in grayscale super easily. If you do this and everything ends up looking the same shade, you'll know that it will help your piece to push these colours further. In mine, I made the fallen tree one of the darkest areas so that the eye was drawn to it. Also, to avoid colours looking dull and muddy, you can try moving along the colour slider for your shadows rather than making everything a darker shade in the same block of colour. To make it more interesting, I added some pink leaves too. I personally preferred it to how it looked with nothing but greens. I think they complemented each other nicely. I wanted to add an animal to the piece, so for fun, I asked people on Twitter what they thought would be cool. I got lots of really good suggestions and it was so hard to choose. I decided I wanted to go for an animal you might find in the real place it was based on, so a badger seemed like a nice choice. I hadn't drawn one before, so that was also a deciding factor. I like adding animals to landscapes because it gives you something to look at and focus on. It helps the piece tell a story too. It maybe makes you wonder what they're doing and how they got there, rather than just looking at it and going, oh, that's pretty. As one of the final steps, I made a layer of a flattened version of the whole piece and flipped it upside down to make a reflection on the water. I set the layer style to lighten as I thought it looked the nicest, and erased any bits that I didn't like. I also add in my multiply and overlay layers so that the shading is deepened. After a few final touches, we're finished. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you go to my previous video, I also have some extra tips for painting backgrounds, which will hopefully be helpful if you haven't already seen it. If you like this piece, I also have it up as a print in my Etsy shop if you'd like to own it. And anyway, see you next time.